Hello. Open source is everywhere. It's in my phone. It's in my watch. It drives transport, research, healthcare, government, and the economy. Yet many people who make open source don't receive value that's in proportion to the value that society gets from it. They are actually often at risk of something we call burnout. What does that mean for the future? How do we work to ensure the future of open source is as successful as the history of it has been successful? Well, I'm Rachel Lawson, Community Liaison for the Drupal Association, and today, a panel of some wonderful people who I can hope can begin to ask the right questions and move us a little closer to some answers about this. Please, let's ask the panel to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit to start with about their own connection to open source. Buddy, would you like to begin?
Yes, hi, I'm Buddy. I'm from Iceland, live in Germany, and I started to use open source when I was probably around 20-something. I have a computer science degree background, and I'm in Drupal since many years now. I love it. So, are we just doing the introduction round now?
Yeah, if we keep moving on, so if I roll us on. So, Christina, can you tell us a little bit about open source? Your involvement?
Some mic problems.
Oh, she's got a microphone problem. We'll come back to Ruth, can you pick that up and tell us why are you here and on this panel?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been using open source probably for about 18 years now.
Yes.
I started using open source tools when I was at uni, fixing laptops and things like that, and got involved with the Joomla community.
Yeah, I'm having problems with the audio,
okay,
but I
and maybe who should we have next? Errol, could you tell us a little bit about
participate on the panel without actually hearing other people, so I probably should restart that.
Anyone hear Christina or us that hear Christina?
Can we hear you?
Sorry?
We hear Christina.
Can you hear this
yes,
Christina?
We hear you now. Go for it.
Does everybody listening out there also hear Christina?
Okay, I'm gonna introduce myself and later I'm going to reset the browser just in case.
Okay.
So, hi, I'm Christina, and I think.
Cool, we hear Christina. Awesome.
We hear Christina, yeah?
Okay,
we can hear you.
So I'm Christina, I'm a front-end designer at Lulabot. I got involved in open source like 10 years ago when I discovered Drupal, and nowadays I'm core UX maintainer, co-coordinator of the Admin UI initiative, working on Claro, and organizer of several tech conferences in Barcelona.
Brilliant. And finally, Vishal, can you tell us a little bit about your recent experiences in open source?
Hi, everyone. This is Vishal Chaudhary. I'm from New Delhi, India, currently pursuing computer science engineering. And I'm very grateful to be in this session and share my experience regarding Drupal and GSOC. Yeah, so as I came to know I've been working with Drupal from past 2 years. So regarding that, yes.
Cool. And just for everybody else's benefit, when Vishal says GSOC, he's talking about the Google Summer of Code program for which Drupal participates. And actually, we're looking for projects this year right now. So if you hear of any, then please let us know. That would be really great. Or if you'd like to help organize a project for the near future. Okay, so moving on.
Hey, Rachel.
You know our panel now. I'm going to start off, and I'm going to ask, first of all, we used in our title of this session the term open source as one.
Rachel.
Maddie, what could you tell us about what you think that means?
I can first tell you that we need Ariel also to introduce.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can Maddie hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you speak?
Yes, they hear me, I think.
Can you hear us, Rachel?
I can't hear anyone now.
Yeah, so I think...
Okay, I was asking Baddy, what does she think about what does open source has won mean?
Rachel, do you hear me?
Okay, okay, put your hand up if you can hear me. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, Baddy, what do you think open source has won means to you?
Do you hear me? You hear me?
I can't hear you.
Hey.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Refresh.
Okay, right.
Your
In
screen.
that case, should we go to Ruth? Can you tell me what open source has won means to you?
Can somebody like... I think Rachel is the only person here who is not hearing us.
And we've lost Christina because she couldn't hear.
And
okay, I'm going to work on the principle that we're going to move on to the next
great
question.
fact, right?
You can't hear anything.
So, Rachel.
Yes.
You hear us now, finally.
Yeah.
We hear each other. We just didn't hear you. You just didn't hear us.
Yeah. Okay. Can you tell me, Baddy, what do you think open source has won means to you?
I'm going to stop now. So Ariel wanted to introduce themselves.
I thought we did, Ariel.
No, because Christina was having problems.
Yeah.
I didn't introduce myself. So, I mean, thanks to the audience for, bearing with us. These things happen with technology, right? So, it happens to the best of us. I'll do a super quick introduction. My name is Errol. My pronouns are they, them. I am a open source designer, and primarily my involvement in open source is through the open source design community. And I've worked on a number of different open source projects, both employed, working as staff members on projects like Ushahidi, and more recently the Open Food Network, but also being a designer contributor to open source. I like to do lots of advocacy for more designers being involved in open source related projects. And that's my introduction. So we can start with the questions now.
I do apologize for everyone, but this has been fun today. Okay, so I tell you what, let's go back to where we were. And I was asking, what does open source has won mean to you? Let's first of all get to Baddy.
I first of all, thank you, and like everyone in the chat. This is so funny, and I think Mike has said it really well. That like, we even have problems on this, and not just only on open source software platforms when we sometimes try to use them for conferences. First of all, like one of the things that I wanna highlight is actually there is tomorrow morning. Ariel is doing a keynote that I think that everyone that is here, please wake up early because it's an early keynote. And sorry that I started off with that, but I think it is important that that's going to be an awesome topic. So why has open? So like personally, I think that I have to start from the Drupal perspective. Is that if Drupal is now 20 years in January, and that is not the only open source software out there or project. That is already 20 years. So there are many of them, and many of them are actually commodities today, things that we are just using without actually realizing that we are using them. And so I would just say open source has definitely won in that sense. We are also seeing that growing at the moment, and but we still have a long road to go. And I think that's why I'm also so excited about, for example, having Ariel here in the panel. And about hearing also from there are other communities. I think tech communities are, like in Drupal, we are very used to this, and somehow I would see our community grow more into design communities and all kinds of other communities. But anyone else wants to add to this?
Anybody else?
I think from my perspective, it's that people are using open source and not realizing they're using open source. It's not like the inferior option. It's actually powering so much of our infrastructure, so much of what we use, like you said in the introduction, Rachel, like our phones and everything, and we're using it without realizing. that for me is massive.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Anybody else got anything to add on the end? Yes, Harold.
I think my perspective on the phrase open source has won and what do we do next is really how we define the term won. I think I completely agree with everything that everyone's saying. Open source is part of it's an integral part of a lot of life and especially technology now. But there are aspects of technology, there are functions within technology, there are roles, there are places where open source is still not as, I'm going to say, celebrated as it could be and should be in a lot of ways. So I like that we've won battles, but we've still got more to go to become to give the appreciation to open source that it really does deserve.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to move on at that point, thinking about the fact that we have a very short amount of time. So it's funny how you were saying about, well, have we really won? I mean, is the current situation sustainable? Do we have enough, how we refer to them, do we have enough makers to balance our takers? Ruth, is that something that you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we're really struggling with at the moment in the Mautic community. So I'm project lead for Mautic, which is an open source marketing automation platform. And over the last 12 months, we've been setting up kind of community infrastructure to allow people to get involved and contribute. But that's the challenge we're facing, is that there's lots and lots of people using the software. There aren't that many people who get involved. And part of that is not necessarily knowing how to get involved, but some of it is people's attitude, like it's just there to use, so why should I give up my time to contribute? And that's something that we're trying to address on both sides of that, like making it really clear how, whether you're a marketer, a developer, a tester, whatever your skills are, how you can contribute, making sure that every contribution is really valuable and they feel like they've really made a difference, but also kind of like challenging that I just want to use the software and I don't want to give back, by saying, well, how about charging 5% on an invoice that you raise for a client, and that money goes back to the open source projects. So if you can't contribute in time, here's some other creative ways that you could help the community that are equally as helpful to us as a very new community that really needs those boots on the ground, but also other resources and publicity, telling people about projects and encouraging other people to come try it.
Yeah. So on that line, Vishal, you spent your summer on working very hard on a project for DrupalCon.
Yeah.
And kind of you had to make a choice. You changed from being a taker, somebody who's just using open source, to somebody who is a maker.
Yeah.
And you evolved that way. What made you do that? What reasons made you make that choice?
Yeah. So I already knew about Drupal from its presence in web and the projects that use Drupal, and especially like even my university website uses Drupal as its content management. So, but even during the preparation of GSOC program, you filter out the organization based on your technology stack and whatever technology you want to do. And Drupal fell into that. It had content management, and I knew PHP, so I felt comfortable going with this. Then even the project pages which I landed on for Drupal, these projects were really interesting, and I felt like they could be used in real life projects, and they have applications. So, and with that, I would say even the community and when I reached out to my mentors, they had very encouraging responses and they wanted me to go for it. So I had all the reasons go for Drupal.
Cool. Anybody get anything to add on to the end of kind of sustainability around open source? Errol?
I think we all will have plenty to add to all of these questions. It's really tricky, right? But comments around sustainability is that some open source projects are more sustainable and more stable than others. And coming predominantly from the NGO nonprofit open source projects perspective, NGOs and open source NGOs are still really, really struggling for funding. They're struggling to find sustainable ways to build their technology models. And I haven't seen that improving anytime soon. And the other thing about sustainability is I know that there are lots of great collectives and organizations like the Sustain OSS that are looking at this. But one of the tricky things around the lesser known functions within open source, so say designers contributing to open source, is that there are still not enough of us doing what needs to be done in order to mentor younger designers coming up into open source. So a lot of the designers in the open source space that have been here for quite a long time are burnt out, are really fatigued, are struggling to manage their amounts of younger designers coming into open source to really adequately mentor them. And that's one of the biggest struggles I see with the design aspect of sustainability in open source.
Yeah.
And not just yeah, I think maybe yes. I don't know, maybe Christina, do you wanna add to that?
Yeah, I guess it could be like, thank you. It could be like Ruth and Ariel both had said, both on other sides, apart from the development, there's usually a lack of people involved, and usually they don't have a reason to get involved. And what Ruth said about what are they winning on doing that? There are a lot of takers, but if we want to have more people that is going to get involved, they a lot of times need a reason to get involved. What are they going to get from there? And I think a good thing that is happening on Drupal is how credits are starting to change and being used also for contributions that are not only code. So I think that's something really important.
Okay, cool. I wonder if we move on from there and move on to, we've talked about a lot of things there, but do we have those right? Can open source be open to a bigger type of contributor? Design, documentation, project management? Errol, I mean, you talked a little bit about this before.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple answer is probably not. We probably don't have all the right people that we need, and it's an unattainable expectation to think that we could have a sort of open source utopia with everyone that we could ever need contributing to our projects. But I definitely think that isn't a reason to not make the effort. So I think that there are structures now for designers to get involved in open source, and we are working really, really hard on those kinds of things. But I still see it really, the aspects that aren't necessarily moving forward as quickly are, say, product managers getting more involved in open source. Where are the avenues for them to contribute and help? And we know from the technology world that is not necessarily open source that successful technology means a combination of all these kinds of different functions, design and product and strategy and business and code and development and security. All these kinds of different things make technology great. And what I would like to see is those roles be able to come into the open source space more comfortably, more successfully, and celebrated more in more unique ways. But sadly, I only have one brain and two hands and a particular interest in design. So I will be stopping there, but I'll be watching with great interest the other spaces.
I find it interesting what you say there about recognizing and giving credits to those who are not just writing code, but all of the other things. That is on. Anybody else got anything about other roles?
Yeah,
Anything
I think we've talked about it, is that like I sometimes say, and especially in a tech community which is focused more on the technology side, like in Drupal, we have a lot of very, very smart people working on very hard problems that which is very difficult for somebody that wants to start contributing, like Vishal wants to join and start doing something. how does he start? You know, where does he start? So like this whole onboarding of taking somebody and helping that person to start participating is like, that's one of our struggles at the moment, at least in the Drupal community. So just to get like issues groomed in a way that there are issues for anyone to come in and join. So I think we are getting better. And I think like we are luckily in Drupal getting you know, more diverse roles into the contribution, you know, and I think like one of the reasons is because we have now such, you know, the non-code contribution recognized. So like it's maybe a little bit more, you know, like maybe that's also the reason why it gets recognized at the moment. So therefore, like maybe I'm doing it a little bit more because I get a little bit more clap on the back from the community or from my peers or something like that. So the more we do that, the more we will encourage people to start participating.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, Ruth. Yes.
I was just going to say it's also good to see things like the Google Season of Docs initiative, because that's brought us in 2 technical writers to come and help work on our documentation in the Mautic community. So the Season of Docs is great for getting developers in, Season of Summer of Code, but the Season of Docs is a different area, and it's bringing people in to projects that may not have traditionally looked at open source. So yeah, I just wanted to share that as well. It's been a really great initiative for us in the Mautic community.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that, I mean, we're talking there about recognition and being able to, for example, in the Drupal community, we have separated completely the ability to give contribution recognition in terms, you know, sort of points away from committing code. A lot of open source projects based upon, I don't want to pick on GitHub, but they are quite big. Of open source projects there. There's very few ways other than actually making a commit for it to be somehow counted. Is that, it sounds like what we're doing there is something really valuable by separating those two things.
Yeah, I believe that, like, you know, we need like you know, the recognition is actually important, right? You know, and that's like the only way. So like maybe that's also why open source has been in tech so successful, because like there is the GitHub that you just like, if you commit something, you get your commits, you know, and then you become like you get so many stars your project and all this stuff. Like it is about that you just like, you get excited about it. You see that people are using it. And I totally think that like we need to make sure that this is happening in all, you know, not just in doing a Git commit. Like it needs to be done with more than that. I think it helps. I don't know, how are you doing it in the Mautic community? Are you recognizing contribution there as well, like non-code?
Yeah, so we have a community health dashboard at dashboard.mautic.org, which is using the open source Grimoire Lab tool from Bitergia, and that brings in data from Slack, from the forums, from GitHub, from our meetups as well. So it allows us to see generally the health of the community. And I kind of manually pull that data into a report. We don't have a recognition system per se yet. We're a bit too new-ish for that. But we do try to make sure that people get those shout outs, especially when there's been, you know, significant contribution that may not be seen. Organizing events like this on our Mauticon we had in November was an epic amount of work by people, you know. So yeah, I think that's really important too. Like someone mentioned it in the chat, the validity of those contributions being as an open source project as the actual code reviews and the code being written, because the project wouldn't exist in the way it does without everything else that surrounds it in the ecosystem.
Okay, so we've talked there about how to attract people into roles, but we don't just need individuals, do we? The individuals need the support of the organizations that can kind of, you know, pay their rent and feed them. So why should a business contribute to open source? Why a business? Why an organization? Why a government? Why should they be financing and making it possible for their staff to contribute to open source? I think, Errol, you had a quick thing on this.
Yeah, my quick comment on how businesses can support open source really, again, is the same drum that I will continue to beat, is a lot of the time when businesses and individuals even think about supporting open source, they think about maybe supporting the tech that underpins their tech. So maybe the open source projects that they use and the things that they can understand more easily, which again kind of comes back to the code related things, the development related things. And one of the things that I was really over the moon to see this year particularly was the GSOC, the Google Summer of Code, and the outreachy projects that were coming through from open source organizations asking for design help. So there was one from Humanitarian OpenStreetMap looking at hiring, bringing in an outreachy intern to work on the UX of their tools. And I was like, this is amazing. We need more of this. We need more internships that are placing other functions within that. And if businesses can support that, fantastic. I mean, I think and talk a lot with the open source design community about the opportunities that businesses can have when they could do a secondment for maybe if they have on-staff designers for themselves, if they can gift that designer a month working with an open source project to improve what they're doing. I just think that would be so beneficial for the community, and I would love to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually something that we faced with the admin UI. Well, exactly, specifically for the redesign of the Claro theme and everything, and it really worked out having designers showing up for a few times. But it's important that if you put someone, a designer, a company is contributing some time, it is important that this time is long enough so a designer can get involved, understand, and later produce. So it's usually not just placing someone else 2 days, because you really need some time to get involved on the project.
Cool. Oh, Vishal, I saw you there.
I just wanted to the message, even in the message from Ricardo, like there are many organizations which have done that, and even for example, like Drupal, this is also sponsored by different businesses, and I think even the idea should actually motivate people to contribute in the open source, which will really help if they can understand the project.
Yeah, and I will say the Google Summer of Code project are changing the length of their summer internships this year to make them smaller, which means we can look to have more projects.
Different projects,
yeah, because
right?
it's easier to organize a smaller project. Yeah. So that's actually really useful. More people should be looking at the Google Summer of Code and thinking, hey, I could actually, especially if you're a module maintainer and thinking, hey, maybe I could get someone in here. And there's somebody who was on a secondment on a sponsored position. They're actually being paid to do work on that module, which is great. Sorry, did I see you were about to say something as well?
Yeah, I want to say from a company owner perspective, because in the end of the day, like we of course need to like, I would love that I could just like, support anyone and just like make sure that everybody just works on really good projects and all the stuff. But in the end of the day, like we have a responsibility to pay and feed like families, and we need to make sure that that is always the priority that we do. So when we decide to sponsor or participate or contribute to open source, like for us, like we do that for very, very specific reasons. So from a strategic perspective, does it make sense for our company to actually like, so for example, why do we contribute to Drupal? Well, because Drupal is a big part of our company. And if we see Drupal succeed, then like our company is probably going to succeed. So why do we allow our developers, for example, or our employees to contribute to Drupal? Well, because if they are like contributing in an open source community, they will potentially become better, developers, employees, and so on. Because they are actually just like working in a higher quality. They are being checked what they're doing. So the quality of the code that we are actually delivering or the work that we are doing is potentially higher because we are part of something larger than just what we decide to do in our company. It is, so there are many very different ways, and I like, yeah. So maybe we can go into some of the questions because I see so many questions, but like I think like it can't be just about like wanting to sponsor something just because I want to do something good. It needs to have a reason. And
so talking about that Amy June Highline just brought up was around, do you think a company's open source contributions are a good thing to help with your talent recruitment?
Like 1,000 times in my case. So where I see Ariel doing this. So for us, being active in an open source community like Drupal definitely helps us to recruit good people in our company when we are trying to look for Drupal people, right? So that is like 100%. So recruitment is definitely one of the things for us. But I'm interested to hear what Ariel says about it.
Yeah. My sort of instant reaction of like, oh, I have complicated feelings about this because I agree in principle. The open source community is a great place to find people that are engaged with your project, that have demonstrated that they know about your project. But coming from a very recent example, that is such a privilege to be able to have that time to invest in that organization, that open source, to then be potentially hired. I think that the trouble that I see is when there are alternate candidates that maybe haven't contributed to your open source for very good reasons. They've got family commitments, care commitments. They don't have a lot of time for open source. And I've seen candidates be, and I know that this probably isn't what we all would want to do, but I've seen candidates be compared to each other by how many contributions they've made versus how they haven't, and not necessarily whether they're a good candidate or not. And also, you're also not going to necessarily find certain functions. So if you're not hiring a function which can easily contribute to your open source, like again design, you're less likely to find people. So yeah, there are complicated feelings, but I still think the community is a good place to find enthusiastic people, but they can't be the only place you find them.
Yeah, we talked a lot about businesses there. I mean, we've got business owners in the room, so that's kind of likely to be the way it comes up. But we've got a couple of questions on a related topic, both from Ricardo Sanz and Christine Ziegler, and they're both related to government, and government use of open source. And what can we be doing to, or should we even be, encouraging people in government to be using open source and contributing it? And I mean, I know the European Commission do contribute significantly to Drupal.
Can I say like one story here, because like I get like, so the Icelandic government, my dear Iceland, they are like, open source is like the way to go, except where it comes to a content management system. And they decided to use a proprietary system for that. And I asked a question there, and I said like, why? And then the answer was actually, and now I'm coming a little bit into what the discussion is here. The answer was like, well, there is no headless open source system out there that we can use that like fulfills our requirements, which is a really interesting thing to hear, coming from Drupal and knowing what Drupal can do. So like there we are not doing a really good job in like, and giving government in that case like information about like what our projects can do, for example. And I'm thinking about Mautic probably in the same way, because we don't have the fancy marketing material out there, because we are like a community, we are a project, we are not a product. Okay, Mautic may be partly a product also, but the site, not the community itself. So I get really frustrated when I hear that the government, in the Icelandic government, decide to use a proprietary software for something that they can so easily use as an open source software. And there, like, I get sad that there we are losing. But sorry, Christina, you were going to say something.
Oh, sorry. No. Well, yeah, but I was just waiting. Yeah. Well, okay. To add to that, probably what we can do about that is putting pressure on the governments, because they usually won't hear a few independent tweets just claiming for open source. Usually one of the best ways is grouping together different communities on the open source and getting to be a big bunch of people or communities that can actually get track and be important and have a lot of public support. And I would say probably the public support is something that is really important here. For example, there's been like a movement to get rid of Google products, or not get rid, or at least explain to schools that they can use tools that are not only Google products. They can actually have other tools, but schools won't get to this information if there's no one behind it. And actually the real government showing that. And thanks to several organizations, there was this movement where they knew that they could do that. Then obviously you need to have someone that is interested in doing that. But unless you go to public and you do some patch and you don't, then governments usually just don't care about it. Unless it's a government that might.
Okay. I'm seeing quite a lot of, I think we have most of the Q&As are things that we've already touched upon. Drew Gorton was asking there, Ruth, you mentioned a community health dashboard. Is that the Chaos one? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's the Chaos community tool. So that's community health and open source sustainability. I think that's what the abbreviation is. And they have an open source tool called Grimoire Lab. It runs on Elasticsearch, Kibana. And it's one of the first things I set up when I came into the role as community manager, because I think a lot of the time community management can be a bit like, well, I think everything's going okay, but like my approach was, well, show me the numbers, and actually allowing me to point out that things like when the acquisition was announced of Mautic Inc. by Acquia, we had a massive drop off in community contributions because people didn't know what was going to happen with the software, and also the engineers were busy doing other things. So I could demonstrate that and say, look, we're having a big problem with our backlog because of this. And being able to look across the entire community, Slack, forums, Meetup, Git, also gives us an idea of what's happening in other places, particularly the forums. The forums is a big place of people asking questions and people answering questions. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Drupal forums do get used to an extent, but we tend to get things on Stack Exchange, etc. as well, and including other places such as groups.drupal.org.
You can pull in from Stack Exchange. You can pull in from lots of different tools, and because it's open source, you can write your own stuff as well. So yeah, we just have a basic out of the box implementation basically at the moment. But yeah, I think it's so important if you are involved in a community. You could also pull in data from other communities and see how you compare. For example, like I built a personal project just comparing like Drupal, Mautic, Joomla, and WordPress based on activity in Git. So there's lots of awesome tools out there that you can use.
Here's an interesting one. I think it might be our last question. And it kind of turns things on its head a little bit. It's from Kenneth Rahul. And it said, they say, what will we do if open source starts exploiting the world? It's like it's turning it on its head. What will we do if we think it's heading in the wrong direction? I know it's a difficult question.
We stop contributing to it.
I think that's, yeah, I mean, I would imagine that most of us are here and doing this because we have a belief in what we're doing. That would be a reasonable thing to say.
Yeah, I think it is not an easy question. Like, it's not easy to answer it, because I think that, you are part of it, just like you said, Rachel, because we are part of it because we believe in that, what we are contributing to, being whatever it is that we are contributing to. So I think that if I would see Drupal going in a wrong direction and that being used in a wrong way, I think that I would very quickly go out and stop participating in that. So that could be my only answer to this one.
This is a really tricky question. I actually think that some projects probably are exploitative in many ways, and from a perspective of, so there's one perspective which is open source being a gateway into a tech career. I observe a lot of conversations in different kinds of non-European and westernized countries that open sources seem to be the way in which you can build a really good portfolio of work. And does that mean that some projects exploit people that want more contributions to be able to then get employment? And I think it's likely to be not done explicitly with that intention, but it likely happens. And I think that some other projects are also enabling things that a lot of us wouldn't agree with, or enabling like things that are very harmful to society and the world and things like that. And I think that it touches on a really, really difficult topic around open source. And I know it's a big, divisive, contentious point around like ethics and what are your personal ethics, what are project-based ethics, what's the definition of open source versus those ethics. And really the answer that I sort of come to without necessarily getting into deeper arguments about this is you individually make your own choice as to whether you think that open source tool, project, etc. is doing something aligned to your beliefs. But as long as it remains in the definition of open source, if you agree with that, you can continue to contribute, but that it's not really your choice to tell other people to use it or tell governments to use it and things like that. That's where it gets really tricky, is say if connecting to a government project, if a government is using something that a lot of people disagree with, what do we do then? How as a society, as a community, do we organize against or around that kind of topic? It's real tricky.
Yeah, I think that, Drew Gorton's just kind of posted a question around open source itself is just a model around producing code. But what's interestingly becoming really, really quite a big deal is about the data and the openness of data, especially personal and private data. And what do we think about the governance of that? I think that possibly you might touch on a little bit about that tomorrow morning in your keynote, Errol. Yeah, so that could be a little option for us to say that there, and maybe some of these types of conversations will continue at 8:30 CET tomorrow morning.
So it means that for Drew, because he's been putting in questions, he cannot go to sleep tonight because he needs to be awake late in the US so he can catch the... okay. So you know that now, Drew, right?
Okay, well, thank you to our panel. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. We have talked about maybe continuing this. So if we've got any further questions, then please find us, stop us, and say hello. That leaves us with 5 seconds to say thank you, everyone, for coming along. And thank you.